Alrighty, and welcome back to the Mother-Daughter Disney podcast. My name is Amanda. I'm here with my lovely mother.
Hi, I'm Janette.
And today we are doing our part 2 for the Bronze Era. So again, as a reminder, we are doing the Bronze Era of Disney movies, though again, some websites and some people on social media and stuff consider the second half of the Bronze Era to be the Dark Ages, which I think is really funny. Very sad for these 4 movies if you think about it. But overall, I would say once you go through these movies, I would argue that none of them are like the popular movies. Okay. Like I would say if you think of the Bronze Era, probably the most successful ones was the Aristocats and maybe the Rescuers or maybe Robin Hood. But I would argue that these 4 are probably on the lower half for sure. And that is why some people call them the Dark Ages, because they didn't really last the test of time.
They didn't really do much.
Yeah, in the same way some of the other movies did. So however you would like to split up the movies, whether it's part 2 of the Bronze Era or we're into the Dark Ages, that's all for you. But again, to first cover the first 4 movies of the Bronze Era was the Aristocats, Robin Hood, The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, and the Rescuers. And again, now we'll get into the last 4 movies. So the first one in 1981, what do you think it was, Mom?
I told you, don't ask me. I don't know. Was it like, Atlantis or something?
No, it was not.
Hercules?
1981, it was The Fox and the Hound.
I was going to say The Fox and the Hound like 3 movies ago. Okay.
So this movie was directed by Art Stevens, Ted Berman, and Richard Rich. What a name, Richard Rich. If you had the last name Rich, why would you name your son Richard?
It was a comic book called
Richard Rich. I wonder if that was a stage name.
Yeah.
With music by Buddy Baker.
Okay. I have to say one thing about The Fox and the Hound.
Yeah.
Obviously, like I said, this is an age when I was not watching Disney movies. I cannot watch Fox and the Hound even now.
Oh, because it's sad?
The first 10 minutes, I'm hysterical crying.
Sad.
Yes.
Well, the story was based on Daniel P. Max's 1967 novel, The Fox and the Hound. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure a lot of that core, I will say I haven't read the novel, so I'm sure that a lot of the core storylines and plots came from the novel.
Can't take it. Can't even take the first 10 minutes of that movie.
So again, now whenever we reference Disney, a lot of times we're going to reference Disney as the company rather than Walt Disney himself, just because Walt Disney is now passed now. So again, a lot of these movies were developed post-Walt Disney's passing. So when I say Disney, I'm referring to the Disney company, whereas previous episodes, it was always Walt Disney. But sad times are times that are sad. All right, so Disney had acquired the film rights as early as 1967, but the development did not really truly begin until the spring of 1977, so almost 10 years later after they had the rights. So Ritherman had read the book and felt like it could work as an animated feature. He initially wanted to call it The Fox and the Hounds, but then the story became focused on just the 2 characters, so that the plural was dropped, which I just thought was a funny thing. So there was tension between some of the older Disney leadership and again, that younger generation of animators that was coming up, because remember, this was a time where they're trying to bring in new animators, they're training new animators. A lot of them were up and rising at this point, but again, there was that point of contention between, again, the old and the new for the most part, and some of these movies they're all going to kind of reflect that idea of the old and the new, I would say. So Ritherman was originally directing alongside Art Stevens, but again, their power struggle kind of was developing between them, and so they end up having another co-producer, which was Ron Miller, and Miller had supported giving more responsibility to the younger artists, where Ritherman was hesitant to have full control, hand over full control to them as well. All right, so one of the biggest debates during the movie when they were creating it centered on the character Chief. So in the original novel, Chief dies, and in early versions of the film that followed the same idea. But the younger story artists argued that the story needed more emotional weight to make Copper's anger feel more believable in the story. But Art Stevens had pushed back, saying Disney was not going to start killing off major characters in his animated films. Ironic. In the end, they changed it so Chief just broke his leg instead, and he survived. So they had a few abandoned ideas too, as all things when you're just kind of storyboarding things.
They're putting their thoughts
so
out.
One of the abandoned ideas was a musical sequence with 2 cranes that was going to be voiced by Phil Harris and Charo. And the scene had been fully storyboarded. Charo had done vocals, and there was live action reference footage that was even shot as well. But many of the people in the studio felt the sequence was distracting from the main story, and after several story meetings, it was just ultimately removed. And according to production history, Ritherman eventually acknowledged that the animation might be becoming a young man's medium. So it's kind of during this time he was thinking maybe we should be handing things over to the younger animators. So The Fox and the Hound marked one of the last involvements for a lot of the most famous Disney legendary animators like Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston, but it was also one of the first major projects for a lot of those newer artists who would help define the Renaissance era going forward. So, and there was a major crisis in 1979 when Don Bluth, Gary Goldman, John Pomeroy, and several other of the Disney animators resigned from Disney kind of all at once. So this was a huge blow to the overall team overall, as a lot of those guys had already been working on a lot of the scenes for Fox and the Hound. And so again, this pushed the release of the movie from the Christmas 1980 to summer of 1981. And they also had to hire even more animators to help finish this specific film. All right, so let's get into some casting. So the voice cast was mixed some of the familiar Disney performers that we've heard before with some new ones. So Mickey Rooney was the voiced adult Todd, while Kurt Russell voiced adult Copper, and Pearl Bailey played Big Mama, and Jack Albertson voiced Amos Slade, and that would actually become one of his final roles. Sandy Duncan voiced Vixie, Janette Nolan voiced Widow Tweed, and Pat Bertram voiced Chief. Kurt Russell was actually one of the last major cast members chosen, and Jackie Cooper had auditioned for the adult Copper, but left the project after asking for more money than the studio was willing to pay, which I think is kind of funny. All right, so the music was all handled by Buddy Baker, with songs written by Stan Fiedel, Jim Stafford, and Jeffrey Patch. The soundtrack included songs like Best of Friends, Lack of Education, A Hunted Man, Goodbye May Seem Forever, and Appreciate the Lady. And unlike some of the earlier Disney films, the music here leaned more emotional and reflective, and supporting the film's themes of friendship, separation, and growing up. Again, all sad themes if we're thinking about it. So it's sad. I haven't seen Fox and the Hound in years, for being honest. So I should probably rewatch it. So the movie premiered on July 10th, 1981, which is crazy because that's my cat's birthday. So July 10th. All right. So the reviews were quite mixed when the film came out. So a lot of critics recognized that the film was trying to do something a little bit more mature and not just like the typical animal buddy adventure film. But again, retrospectively, people had said it was kind of that gap between the old and the new. Again, the old artists again and kind of the new artists, the new style that Disney was going to start heading towards. But the film was recognized internationally in 1982. It won a Golden Screen Award in Germany and was nominated for both a Young Artist Award and a Saturn Award for Best Fantasy Film, which was pretty cool. And at the time, this was Disney's most expensive animated film ever to be made, with a reported budget of over $12 million. During its initial release, it was successful. It grossed $39.9 million domestically, which at the time was the highest initial domestic gross for an animated. And its distributed rentals were reported at $14.2 million, while international rentals reached $43 million. The film also later re-released a few times as well too. And across all of its releases, The Fox and the Hound is estimated to reach a lifetime gross of $63.5 million. So again, while Fox and the Hound I feel like is not one of the most popular Disney classics or Disney movies or anything like that, again, it was definitely seen as a handoff film. Again, a last chapter for some of those like animators, and again the new stomping grounds for some of the new animators as well too. And considering it made a lot of money, considering it's not one of the most popular films to date. Like it didn't last the test of time, but it was very popular in the moment at the very least. So, all right, let's get to the next film. The next film in 1985. Do you know what it is?
Stop asking me.
It is the Black Cauldron. So released in 1985, the Black Cauldron was a dark fantasy adventure based loosely on the first two books.
I've even seen that one.
Based loosely on the first two books and Lloyd Anderson's The Chronicles of the Prydain series, The Book of Three, and The Black Cauldron. It was directed by Ted Berman and Richard Rich and produced by Joe Hill with featured music by Elmer Bernstein. So Disney had acquired the rights to Lloyd Alexander's books in the early 1970s, with pre-production beginning in 1973. The material was different and fun because it offers something more serious and adventurous than many of the previous Disney animated films, but at the same time, the studio was, again, at this time thinking, like, let's try to reach some older audiences, like the teenagers, for instance, since a lot of the previous films were really for, like, the kiddie folk, I would say. The Black Cauldron seemed like a chance to do something bigger and darker and a bit more ambitious. But that ambition also made the film difficult to develop in the sense that Alexander's book series had many storylines and more than 30 characters. So the Disney team really had to start condensing this large fantasy world into one short animated feature. So early concept work by Mel Shaw was considered visually impressive, but also too advanced for the newer animation staff at the studio since they couldn't keep up, so to speak, basically. And the film was originally expected to be much earlier, but again, it just kept getting pushed back and pushed back. Like basically every Disney animated movie we've ever seen, it got pushed back. The production, of course, it was going through all those leadership changes, kind of same thing with Fox and the Hound. Again, it was being developed around the same time. So we had all the leadership changes and the creative changes that we had seen. John Musker was originally supposed to direct, but then his ideas were considered too comedic by some of the older audiences. So that was when Ted Berman and Richard Rich had become the directors. And the team heavily revised the film, compressing the first two Prydain books and reshaping the Horned King into a much darker and more spectacle villain, I would say. So some of the artists, when they were working on it, wanted to push the studio towards something more dramatic and modern, while others were still trying to preserve that traditional Disney classic approach. So again, during this development, that's when some people had fully left the project to go work on the next movie in the Bronze Era, which again, we'll talk about very soon. And then other ones decided to stay on this one. So let's talk about some casting now. So in the casting world, Gary Berghoff, best known from MASH, which is funny. That's literally what Wikipedia said.
Okay.
Gary Berghoff, best known from MASH, auditioned for Gurgi and reportedly tried several different vocal approaches before the role eventually went to impressionist John Byner. Haley Mills was at one point being considered for Princess Eloanwe, but the final role went to Susan Sheridan, and John Hurt voiced the Horn King, giving the film one of Disney's most intense villains. It says Susan Sheridan.
Oh, Sheridan. Okay.
I don't know. Maybe I took that wrong from Wikipedia, so sorry about that. The film's rough cut, especially the climactic cauldron-born sequence, was considered too intense and frightening for children. So a lot of the newly appointed Disney chairman Jeffrey Katzenberg ordered cuts to the film, which was unusual and controversial for the time because animated films were normally edited much earlier in storyboard and animatic form. So to have these late edits cuts so far down when the animation was already done delayed the movie from 1984 to all the way to 1985. I would love to see that original cut. I think it'd be very interesting to see what it looked like. Sorry, so let's get to some music. So in the music world, unlike most of the Disney animated features, The Black Cauldron had no musical numbers. So instead, Elmer Bernstein composed a dramatic score that used the Andres Morton, an electronic instrument that helped create the film's darker, more mysterious atmosphere. But because of these last minute revisions, again, that from when they were cutting stuff and everything, again, part of the score was also cut as well too. So again, lots of things are being cut from the film overall. So when The Black Cauldron finally released on July 24th, 1985, it overall received pretty mixed reviews. So Lloyd Alexander had a complicated reaction. He had said the movie had little resemblance to the books, but he still found the film to be enjoyable. So he was hoping that viewers would see the movie and like it and then want to go read the novels for, again, the more powerful, deeper, into the story, which makes sense. If you have that many characters in that big of a fantasy world and it's being cut down to be a kid's film, basically, of course, a lot of things are going to be cut out. So The Black Cauldron had a budget of $25 million, but Don Hahn had later said they think that the movie had actually cost about $44 million to make, which would have made it
over budget.
Yeah, which would have made it one of the most expensive films at the time to ever produce of all time. And domestically, it only grossed, so $44 million to make, and it only grossed $21.3 million. So it earned less than half of what it cost to actually create the film. And it says that it was even outgrossed by the Care Bears movie, which I think is funny. God. And it was also outgrossed by Disney's own re-release of 101 Dalmatians.
Oh, I can see that. Okay.
Yeah, their own re-release and the Care Bears movie, again, both outgrossed The Black Cauldron. So because of this being a failure, basically, The Black Cauldron has a reputation of being, in quotes, the film that almost killed Disney. So I would say there's been quite a few movies in Disney animation history that, again, almost stopped the studio, so to speak. Yes. So The Black Cauldron is just one of them. It's not the only one. So it would say it did put the Disney animation studio kind of in danger because, again, unlike some of the other ones, they weren't sure how they're going to bounce back without Walt. Because, again, before they always had Walt Disney to kind of... So it says that while The Black Cauldron is not necessarily a memorable Disney movie, there is a cult following out there for The Black Cauldron because, again, especially people who liked the Alexander's books on it, because, again, that big fantasy world.
I've never seen it.
It is a darker film as well, too. Some people do still really like it, but again, I would argue that most people have not seen this movie, nor do they remember this movie if they have seen it.
I remember the cover, like what the advertisement was, but I do not. I've never seen the movie.
No, for sure. So now the studio's in debt. People are panicking. What are we going to do now? It's 1986. What movie is going to come out? I feel like you should know this one. This is The Great Mouse Detective.
Luke liked that one.
I was going to say another one. My brother was big of the Bronze Age.
Yes, these were all movies that I didn't watch. I never saw when they came out.
So coming after the flop of The Black Cauldron, sorry to The Black Cauldron, said with love, the next movie's success was incredibly important for the animation studio. So The Great Mouse Detective is based on the children's book series Basil of Baker Street by Eve Titus and Paul Galdone. It was directed by John Musker, Ron Clements, Dave Michener, and Bernie Mattinson, with music by Henry Mancini. Wow, I had 4 directors. That's wild. So the idea of doing a Sherlock Holmes-inspired animated film with animals had been discussed as early as the production of The Rescuers. Veteran Leo artist Joe Hale suggested adapting the Basil of Baker Street books, but the idea sat in development for years because they felt like it was too similar to The Rescuers overall, which kind of makes sense if you think about it, because they're both like mouse characters, I guess. Yeah. In 1982, 1992, Ron Clements brought the concept back, and he and story artist Pete Young pitched it to Disney president Ron Miller at the time. Miller approved the project partly because many animators were unhappy with the direction the Black Cauldron was taking. Again, like people were working on things at the same time. So as I said before that people didn't like the Black Cauldron, they moved on to the next movie. A lot of them moved on to The Great Mouse Detective.
Right, yeah.
So originally the film was called Basil of Baker Street, after the books of course, but after Michael Eisner became Disney's CEO and Jeffrey Katzenberg became the studio chairman, the project went through, again, some major changes. So there was a story reel that they had seen and they thought the pacing was too slow, so they had more rewrites before animation could begin. Eisner also cut the projected production budget in half from $24 million to $10 million and moved up the release date to July of 1986.
Must sound like a little pressure.
So they only had about a year and a half to finish the movie, basically. So after Young Sherlock Holmes, which was a live-action Disney movie, so Young Sherlock Holmes underperformed at the box office, Eisner decided that Basil of Baker Street sounded too English and renamed the film to The Great Mouse Detective. But a lot of the animators did not like this rename, so even animator Ed Gombard wrote a satirical memo jokingly renaming earlier Disney films with bland, generic titles like Seven Little Men Help a Girl for Snow White and The Little Deer Who Grew Up for Bambi. So a lot of people did not like the Great Mouse Detective name, but alas. So casting, let's get into casting. Barry Ingham won the role of Basil very quickly in his audition, while Val Betton was Ron Clements' first choice for Dawson. For the villain, the filmmakers were studying Ronald Colman's performance in Champagne for Caesar as a possible model for Basil, but when they watched the film, they were immediately drawn actually to Vincent Price, who also appeared in it. Price agreed to audition and went to voice Professor Ratigan, one of Disney's most theatrical villains. Ratigan's design also changed after Price was cast. The character was originally thinner and more rat-like, but Glenn Kane later said that Price's expressive voice and attitude inspired the artist to completely redesign him. Kane also based part of Ratigan's physical appearance on then Disney CEO Ron Miller, who was unusually tall and had played football for the Los Angeles Rams. Originally, the ending was going to take place on the hands of Big Ben, but layout artist Mike Peraza suggested moving the confrontation inside the clockworks with giant grinding gears, like to add the more danger to the scene. And the sequence is also partly inspired by Hayao Miyazaki's The Castle of Cagliostro, which was also featured a dramatic clock tower finale. And the team even traveled to London for reference footage, and they received a very rare interior access to Big Ben's interior so they could see what it looked like, again, to base it off. Disney really does get special treatment, don't they? So the sequence also made this clock sequence also made the film really technically important because the gears inside Big Ben were created with computer-generated wireframe graphics, printed out and then traced onto animation cells with hand-drawn characters added on top. So the 2-minute scene became one of Disney's earliest major uses of computer animation in a traditional animated feature. When The Great Mouse Detective was released on July 2nd, 1986, it received positive reviews. Jens Siskel and Robert Egbert both praised it, with Egbert comparing its animation favorably to Disney's golden age, and critics often highlighted the film's energy, its character animation, and dark visual style, and everyone especially liked the Big Ben finale. That was like the hard hitter for everyone. I remember that scene too, specifically because I haven't seen this movie in a long time.
Yeah, I don't.
But again, I remember
it.
Luke really liked it. I remember that was a very dramatic scene in the clockworks of Big Ben. So the film cost a little over $14 million to make, and it grossed over $50 million worldwide during its initial release. And then again, it had a
They
few.
needed that.
Yeah, had a few re-releases as well. And so after a lot of its re-releases in North America, it had grossed $38.7 million as well in some of its re-releases. And again, coming after the flop of The Black Cauldron, The Great Mouse Detective helped restore the confidence in the Disney animation department too. Obviously, financially, it helped a lot too. But again, just having that confidence that like we can make a great movie, and The Black Cauldron, sorry to The Black Cauldron.
Too bad.
Feel real bad for The Black Cauldron the more we get into it.
Everybody's perfect, right?
But all right, now we are to our final movie in the Bronze Era / the Dark Ages. So what do you think our last movie that came out
I'm still with the Sword in the Stone, or what is that?
We already did the Sword in the Stone. The Sword in the Stone was last era.
The Lost City. What's his name?
No, it's not Atlantis.
Okay.
It is Oliver and Company. So Oliver and Company was inspired by Dickens' Oliver Twist, but Disney gave the story a very modern twist, moving from Victorian London to New York City and building the cast around an orphaned kitten and a group of street smart dogs and a pop-driven soundtrack, is what Wikipedia said. It was directed by George Scribner and music by J.A.C. Redford. Now, I thought this was an interesting choice because I feel like a lot of the other previous Disney films, they had actually moved things back to Europe and back to England and back to European cities.
Right.
Where here, they're like, let's come to New York. So I thought that was really fun fun because, especially for early Disney movies, a lot of the movies don't take place in America, ironically enough. So the project began during a major turning point again for the Disney Animation Studios. So Oliver and Company was first animated and developed under the supervision of Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg, who had joined Disney in 1984. But in one now famous pitch meeting, sometimes called the Gong Show, story artist Pete Young suggested the idea as Oliver Twist with dogs, and the pitch was quickly approved alongside another project that would become one of the first movies in the Renaissance era. So when we get to that, we may call that one out, but I'm not going to say what the movie is now. If you know, you know, but if you don't, I know for sure my mom probably does not.
No.
But, all right, so again, like in many movies, it went through several changes before landing on its final form. So early on, Oliver and Dodger were considered as 2 kittens and then 2 dogs, but then the team decided to just have Oliver be the kitten and then everyone else was going to be the dogs. And they also had some other abandoned ideas too, including Fagin trying to steal a rare panda from Central Park Zoo, and some other early drafts gave Rita a much larger role before the story eventually shifted more towards Oliver's relationship with Dodger. So behind the scenes again, the first year of development was reportedly very difficult in the sense that some artists felt the film had lost its contemporary edge. So Scribner was pushing to make it feel less like a direct Dickens adaptation and more like a hip, modern New York story. Production officially began in 1986, and over 2.5 years, about 300 artists and technicians worked on the film. So now to get some casting. In the casting world, the filmmakers wanted voices that felt unmistakably New York, and so Billy Joel became one of the first actors to be cast. He auditioned by phone for the role of Dodger, even though he had avoided acting for years. In the end, like Billy Joel helped, again, like a lot of the characters, the voice actor helped inspire the character itself, what he was going to look like. And he did. He helped inspire a lot of Dodger's design later on as well. And again, also to more closely align with how Joel was recording his lines and recording the singing of his lines as well too. So Cheech Marin's performance as Tito led to the character getting more screen time and development as well. Bette Midler was cast as Georgette after dozens of actresses had auditioned for Georgette. Cheryl Lee Raft voiced Rita, and Ruth Pointer provided Rita's singing voice. The design and animation process also leaned heavily into New York City itself. The team used real dogs as references for the animators and redesigned characters after the actors were cast. To capture a dog's eye view of the city, Scribner borrowed a technique from Lady and the Tramp using a low-mounted camera on real streets as visual reference. The film also included major use of computer-generated imagery with CGI for elements like the Brooklyn Bridge, cars, cityscapes, subway scenes, Fagin's trike, and Sky's limousine. All right, let's get to some music. So rather than treating the film as a traditional musical where the story stopped for songs, Scribner wanted the songs to feel like extensions of the characters. So Katzenberg pushed for pop songwriting approaches with major names contributing to the soundtrack, which is why such as Billy Joel was cast. So Billy Joel performed Dodger's Why Should I Worry, while Bette Midler performed Georgette's Perfect Isn't Easy, both of which became some of the more famous songs from the overall film. So Oliver and Company premiered at the Ziegfeld Theater in New York City on November 13th, 1988, and then it opened a few days later. And it was also on this, it opened on November 18th, I guess, because it said it was the same day that Disney celebrated the 60th anniversary of Mickey Mouse's Steamboat Willie. So again, we're back to our anniversaries here. So critically, Oliver and Company had received some mixed reviews because some people were a bit divided on the story, and some people said they really liked the story, but other people said they didn't. Some people really loved the use of the music and the celebrity performances of like Billy Joel and Bette Midler, but other people didn't really like it as much. Now, Oliver and Company opened the same weekend as The Land Before Time. So The Land Before Time won the weekend, but Oliver and Company ultimately outgrossed The Land Before Time in the US and Canada. So it didn't win the initial release, but it ultimately won the race, so to speak. So the film earned about $53 million domestically during its original run and became the first animated film to gross over $100 million worldwide in its initial release. So again, it was overall very successful. So again, the movie was considered to have a $31 million budget. So again, after it had grossed a worldwide total, again, after a few re-releases of $121 million, overall Oliver and Company is considered to be obviously financially successful. Now, for the most part, Oliver and Company is considered the last movie of the Bronze Age, or again, like part of the Dark Ages, so to speak, before we kick off into the Renaissance era. Now, some people consider Oliver and Company to be the start of the Renaissance era and say that this is the one that started it all because, again, a lot of those new animators worked on this movie. Again, it was extremely successful at the time, but a lot of people also said it's not part of the Renaissance era because it has not lasted the test of time in comparison to what some of the Renaissance era movies are going to be.
Right, because Oliver, you hardly ever you don't hear about that one. I mean, I think maybe I saw it once when you were kids and that was it.
So again, similar to Fox and the Hound, successful in the moment, but didn't necessarily last the test of time. So, and again, it's still a part of that overall transition era for the Disney animation studios, because let me tell you, the first movie of the Renaissance era is going to be extremely successful and last not just the test of time, but many, many years for it to come. But all right, so again, and that's why some people said that's the first movie of the Renaissance era, whereas again, this Oliver and Company is not the start of the Renaissance era. At the end of the day, to each their own. We can all make our own opinions of what we consider where the eras ebb and flow.
Must be of the Renaissance era.
What do you think it is?
Little Mermaid.
It is a Little Mermaid. I realized I mentioned it last episode. Yeah.
No, timing. I'm thinking of the timing. I'm not even remembering the last stuff. I'm remembering the timing. I mean, that was when Daddy and I went to Disney for a long weekend, and everything was the Little Mermaid.
Yeah, the 90s.
And the music, the pictures, the whole feel of the Caribbean, everything just caught my attention.
Yes, that's why some people say Oliver and Company is still Bronze Age, and Little Mermaid kicks off the Renaissance era.
I was back in Disney at that point. Yes.
It was back and forth. So, all right, so let's end on some fun facts. So first up, fun fact: The Fox and the Hound included about 360,000 drawings, 110 painted cells, and 1,100 painted backgrounds.
Wow.
It just really goes to show how much is really involved in these animated shows, animated movies. All right, The Black Cauldron was Disney's first animated film to receive a PG rating, and the first Disney animated film to include computer-generated imagery. So we talked about The Great Mouse Detective, how that Big Ben scene had the computer-generated imagery. The Black Cauldron actually did it first, with CGI. So The Black Cauldron was also the final Disney animated film completed in the original animation building at Walt Disney Studios in Burbank, California, before the animation studio moved to Glendale, California. The Great Mouse Detective. So in The Great Mouse Detective, Henry Mancini composed a score marking his debut as the composer of a full animated feature. There was no soundtrack album released alongside the movie, which was unusual for Disney, but one eventually came out in 1992 when the film was reissued under the title The Adventures of the Great Mouse Detective. So eventually did get an album. And our last little fun fact here is with Oliver and Company. Oliver and Company was the first Disney animated film to include real-world advertised products with more than 30 logos, brand names appearing in the movie, such as Kodak, Sony, Diet Coke, McDonald's, Yamaha, and USA Today. So I thought that was kind of fun. But all right, so let's get into, so normally we do some Disney news, but this is so pre-recorded, we are not going to do any Disney news for today. So we will have our little Disney quote before we get to our Disney memory. And that is, "There is always a chance, Doctor, as long as one can think." And that is said by Basil in The Great Mouse Detective. Wow, I thought that was fun. All right, do you have a Disney memory for today's episode then, Mom?
Nope, because I didn't see any of these movies. The only thing I remember is just, I guess, it had to be almost recently that it was on on Disney Plus or something, The Fox and the Hound. And I'm telling you, the first 5 minutes was on and I was like, oh my God, I'm crying already. I said, I can't watch this movie.
That's fine. Well, I remember too, they were going to do a live action of Fox and the Hound as well. They had briefly talked about it. I didn't see that in Wikipedia when I was looking it up. But I remember you had said, it's like, how could they do that? Because it's such a sad movie.
It is. It's a sad movie. This poor thing gets left behind, and the look on his face when she's driving away, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't take this. I got too much drama in my life already. I have to say though, that like you said, the young animators were taking over from the old animators, and they were having this thing. I got to say, the characters are adorable. I mean, the coloring is also really good on The Fox and the Hound. When you look at The Fox and the Hound, it's a rich scene. Like when you look at it, the colors are very rich. The color, the depictions of them are really rich. So I thought it was very well done. I just can't watch it.
That's fair. So which movie do you think is your favorite from the Bronze era?
I would think that the Oliver would be mine.
Oliver
Only
Company?
Because of the music, because of the whole idea of New York, and a whole idea
I think for me it's definitely the Aristocats, but it's partially just because I'm such a cat person. Like,
you're talking about all the way back. Oh, I thought we were just talking about
I'm saying the whole Bronze era.
The whole thing is the Aristocats.
Yeah, all eight movies.
Oh, I thought we were talking about just the last four. No, if we're talking about all 8 Aristocrats, just beats them all out.
Yeah, I was going to say, Aristocats is definitely my favorite. I love the Aristocats.
Too cute.
So,
the characters are just too memorable.
Yeah, no, I love that movie so much that, I would agree that was my favorite.
It took them a long time to, I have to say, merchandise-wise, it took them a long time to recognize the Aristocats. Aristocats were not recognized until about, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. But it took a long time after the movie came out for them to even get to that merchandise, even when things were really moving with all the other movies and all the other stuff.
That's what I'm saying. I feel we should, I'll try to do research into the production of merchandise because I know creating merchandise is not easy for the big companies. It's not easy to create merchandise. So yeah, it would be interesting to see how like the different partnerships have evolved over the years of creating merchandise.
Like I said, back then when you're talking about these eras compared to the current ones, all their stuff was being released. But like I said, Disney was not mainstream like it is now. And like you said, the merchandise, they have certain things that they have to do. The merchandise now is like amazing when something's going to be released.
I feel like also too, it's like that they think about that. Whereas I would, just in me spitballing saying is I feel like maybe back then they didn't plan merchandise releases with the movies, whereas now they really do.
Now they realize what they're making on the merchandise.
Especially too because there's such a want for the merchandise.
Yes.
And again, it costs a lot of money to make these merchandise. You don't even know if the movie's going to be successful.
No, you don't know if it's going to be successful.
I was going to say, what if they did a bunch of merchandise for the Black Cauldron? They would have lost millions of dollars.
Right, it would end up in that Disney warehouse being sold for like $2.
So I was saying, I realize it's such a gamble on like what they should produce, what they should make and stuff. But
I think now they know more of what they should and shouldn't do.
Again, too, now I feel like there's just more data to back the fact that people love merchandise. They want to buy things that they like. Again, especially for the Aristocats or things with animals, that people love the animal characters.
Oh yeah, now that stuff's flying off the shelves.
Animal characters are some of the favorites out of any Disney movie and stuff. So it's just interesting to see. But yeah, when I was a kid, I always really liked the Aristocats. So I do remember watching the Aristocats as a kid. And again, out of these 4 movies for this episode, again, it's like none of them were my favorites growing up. So I don't really know any of them.
The only one was the Aristocats. The rest of them
again, the only
one
I remember was the Great Mouse Detective. Again, that scene in the clocks because it was
Luke
so dramatic.
really liked the Great Mouse Detective, and he really liked the Rescuers. And you mentioned Land of Time. Oh my God!
Well, that wasn't Disney. So.
No, it wasn't it wasn't Disney. But let me tell you,
before time.
I'm just saying that because one of the Disney movies came out at the same time. That was watched in this house over and over and over again.
We did like the Land Before Time.
Yes,
we were big Land Before Time.
Yes, they were competing with a very very big loved movie.
Well, I mean, like even now when you look at it, it's like in present day, Disney hasn't won an Academy Award for Best Animated Feature in a couple of years.
Yeah,
because there's a lot of players now, so it's like you gotta really be stepping up your game all the time to win. Not saying I don't think Zootopia 2 shouldn't have won. I think I think it should have won personally. I thought Zootopia 2 was so great. So it's just interesting to see again what those other players come and what these movies are up against with the other competition.
Right, because sometimes when you're talking about Disney all by itself, you're not, like you said, you're not putting it up against those other movies that are coming out at the same time. And when that one came out, Land of Time, I mean, that was just like loved.
Yeah, because even in our Mickey Mouse history podcast that we had done on his own history, again, it's like how his own popularity ebb and flowed throughout the years as other cartoon characters were becoming popular. Specifically with like Popeye, right?
There's always
like a lot
competition.
Of adults love Popeye. So it's just fun to look back and see in history. But again, who has lasted the test of time? But it is Disney. It is Mickey.
Lasts no matter what.
So it's just interesting. So, but our next movie era will be the Renaissance era, which will probably have to also be broken up into at least 2 parts, maybe 3 parts, because there's a lot of movies in the Renaissance era.
Those I probably know because like
and
I won't know them in their order.
There's a lot of information on the Renaissance movies.
Those are the ones that we went to the movies to see, that we saw everything.
Yeah, because that notoriously most people say is their favorite era is the Renaissance era. I would still say the Silver era is one of my favorites because a lot of my favorite movies were from the Silver era, like Cinderella and Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan and stuff. But again, Renaissance era, that will be our next one. So make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you subscribe, follow us on social media as well too. Leave a review and leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube. Let us know what was your favorite movie of the Bronze era. Do you break it up between the Bronze era and the Dark Ages, or is all just the Bronze era to you? Which movie is your favorite? Which one do you rewatch all the time? And which ones do you think have lasted the test of time? Or which ones did you forget existed, like the Black Cauldron?
Black Cauldron, yeah. I can see the picture. I just have no idea what it's about.
Yeah, so let us know. Again, make sure you subscribe so that way when we do post the Renaissance era, you'll be one of the first people to know. But until then, we'll see you. Bye-bye.